Good faith violated by foreign trusts, fraud, and non-disclosure. By Anna von Reitz. Information provided to H.E. Cardinal Mamberti and the Vatican Chancery Court regarding our claims, March 6, 2005, January 19, 2023, in Seek. We have repeatedly observed the formula, or template, that has been used by the offending municipal and British Crown corporations to surreptitiously take over entire countries. This same formula or template has been used with small variations to take over Britain, the United States, India, the Commonwealth countries, most of Western Europe, Japan and South Korea, as well as many other nations being impacted and influenced by it. The template calls for takeover of the lawful national governments by their own associated, territorial, governments, so that if it is even noticed, the military putsch is assumed to be part of the normal functions of the legitimate government during time of war, or as they mischaracterized it in our case, during some kind of national emergency. Then, in the absence of any actual war or national emergency or any other logical excuse whatsoever, these territorial forces remain entrenched, occupying land that doesn't belong to them, racking up costs for their unnecessary and unwanted services, and racketeering against their actual employers. The territorial government provided by the military acting under contract then assumes command and control and asserts a protective custodial interest in the people and assets of the country. Using this as their backstory, they begin illegal confiscation of the public assets and natural resources and private property of the victims of this mercenary ruse. Which nation was having a national emergency, or was engaged in war of some kind, only becomes clear upon consideration of which foreign or domestic citizenry is involved. Though with this being left unstated and undisclosed, most people naturally assume, for example, that it's America that's in trouble, bankrupt, etc., when it's the citizenry of the incorporated municipal corporation and British Crown Corporation subcontractors instead. Let's look at the famous 1930 bankruptcy of the then municipal corporations presided over by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and signed by him as the American representative at the Geneva Conventions in May of 1930, and then, later, when he continued as administrator of the municipal bankruptcy as President of the Municipal, United States. This is, presumably, when the city of Washington, D.C. was sold to inner city of London interests, who then instructed the Territorial Congress to fraudulently exercise the plenary powers never entrusted to them, but were instead meant to be exercised by the American federal subcontractor for different purposes, to create an independent, international city-state out of it. There are numerous problems with this entire prospect, and not only the fact that those undertaking it had no granted authority or ownership interest allowing them to take the action. The city of Washington, D.C., existed to serve as a neutral and separate capital for the federal subcontractors and received its land use permits under those terms and conditions from the state governments of Maryland and Virginia. Once those use permits were violated by the actions of the Territorial Congress and the independent, international city-state acting as a thoroughly foreign, separate, and unauthorized government on our shores, the entire purpose of the grant was undermined and reverted to our nation-states. The independent, international city-state of Washington, D.C., has no land and is unauthorized and is sitting on our property non-consensually as a squatter, one that has purchased property that did not belong to the sellers. It all belongs to us and our nation-states, and even the reason that it was purportedly sold is fraudulent. It was sold to pay the debts that the municipal corporation subcontractors incurred as a result of the First World War. It wasn't any debt that we authorized nor any debt that was covered by any actual contract we had with the municipal corporations, but they misapplied the charges to us and against our assets in bad faith, and manipulated things so that they retained the control and the benefit of the profit side of this dirty business for themselves, by depositing it in public trusts and pension funds and investment funds that they then controlled for us in our absence. In addition to all the other fraud schemes, we will see that this practice of selling things they don't own is a pattern that repeats, as the Territorial Congress, which operates fraudulently as a municipal congress, too, offers to sell or trade our property to foreign investors to pay their debts, usually debts having nothing to do with our contracts with them. Thus, Saudi investors are angry that they have no actual ownership interest in our roads, and Chinese investors are angry that no, they don't actually own the port of Long Beach, California. And this is all the result of criminal activity and confidence racketeering pulled off by municipal and British Crown Corporation employees, all pretending to represent us, when they don't. It would be like a chauffeur selling the ownership interest in his employer's car, when obviously, he has no ownership interest in it. He only appears to have some sort of interest in it, because he has been allowed to drive it for certain purposes. Instead of operating in good faith, the chauffeur engages in fraud and racketeering against his employer and against the would-be car buyers alike. These activities and more like them have tarnished the good name of the United States of America in business and harmed other relationships as well, and this injury has been done to us at the hands of run-amok Municipal and British Crown Corporation employees, who have acted in bad faith and open breach of trust against us, against the public law of this country, and against common decency, too. In our case, our contracts with these organizations and their principles are written in black and white, published worldwide, so there is no excuse for assuming that our federal subcontractors or their employees have been vested with any more, different, or extensive powers, or that they have been allowed to act in any legitimate custodial capacity over us or our assets. Their endless emergencies, like their endless fraudulent bankruptcies and their self-interested mercenary wars, have nothing to do with us or our assets at all, except that these bounders have been contractually obligated to come to our aid on the high seas and navigable inland waterways the entire time, and also obligated to provide us with postal service. The offending Municipal and British Crown corporations housed in the District of Columbia, their franchises including state-of-state franchises, and their owned agency subcontractors, stand forfeit and foreclosed for their crimes and their contractual violations, their breach of trust, and their bad faith on this Easter Sunday 2023. We have suffered gross breach of trust, violation of well-established commercial service contracts, constitutions, unlawful conversion, deliberate misrepresentation, non-disclosure, armed racketeering, what appear to be public courts, operated as private corporate administrative tribunals under color of law, and through it all, we have suffered fraud and wreaking bad faith from our misdirected Municipal Corporation and British Crown Corporation employees, both. We wish for these two sets of corporations, which are the modern-day outgrowths of the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company, both, to be shut down for good. Throughout their entire history, from the Enclosure Acts and the Bottomry Bonds scandals to today, these business interests have served themselves at the expense of their customers, employers, and the general public. They have promoted war for profit, racketeering at home exercised under color of law, phony courts, gross malfeasance, and every possible kind of commercial fraud known to man, including insurance fraud. Insurance, which is legalized gambling, and should not be condoned by a moral society, and insurance fraud, go hand in hand. The first great promotion of fraud, other than the Enclosure Acts and the abuses allowed under Cestui Que Vie Act of 1666, was the Bottomry Bond scandal of 1702, which involved insurance fraud in the jurisdiction of the sea. Nothing has changed in over 300 years with these Municipal and British Crown corporations, except that they are now organized as incorporated entities, and are subject to the treaties and agreements that allow their existence. Our current situation also involves insurance fraud and the same repeat offenders. Let's describe the Bottomry Bond scandal. Non-existent ships were named and created on paper by the Dutch East India Company, registered in Britain and acting as a civilian public vendor serving the British fleet. These imaginary ships were loaded with equally fictitious cargo, and all of this fictional fleet was insured with public bonds. Then these ships and cargoes disappeared, on paper, and they were all presumed lost at sea. Private insurance claims were made and paid, salvage fees related to the missing fleet were claimed and paid, the general public of Britain was lied to, fake funerals for the missing mariners took place, and then, the big payoff for the schemers, cashing out the public bonds against the public purse, to pay for the non-existent public interest in the lost fleet and its cargo. This is what led to the demise of the Dutch East India Company, the largest commercial shipper in the world at the time, and was the reason for its hasty relocation to New York City. What are the common elements to our situation now? First, there was abuse by an incorporated public service vendor promoting a fraud against their employers, the British Admiralty, and ultimately, the British public, except, however, that it's the American public targeted this time around. Second, there was an alleged public interest that was used to justify public bonding underwriting the bottomry, the integrity of the ship and cargo at risk. Third, the fraud was predicated on the existence of fictional ships and cargoes that disappeared off the books of the Dutch East India Company as lost and abandoned vessels. Fourth, this fraud generated a lot of money for the individual employees who privately insured their own cargoes aboard the non-existent fleet, and also for the Dutch East India Company as a publicly insured contractor, and even for the Admiralty, insured for the loss of all its cargo. All of that goes to say that the individual, public employees, working under private contract made money on the scam, the public vendor, made money on its purported losses, and even the territorial government represented by the British Admiralty, made a huge amount of money. The only loser was the general public that got stuck for the public interest bonding on all of this fraud. A very similar fraud has been played here, only instead of non-existent ships and cargoes, vessels of a different kind, American babies misidentified as British territorial U.S. citizens all defined as wards of the British monarch, replaced the non-existent ships, and their possessions including their waived estates in America, replaced the cargoes. These legal fictions were on the books of the British Crown Corporation federal subcontractors for 7 years and then declared, lost at sea. A presumed public interest in the estates and possessions was created, and bonded by the Municipal Corporation federal subcontractor. These new undisclosed Sestuike via states were styled as municipal corporations and defined as municipal citizens of the United States under the so-called Diversity Clause of Federal Code Title 28, liable for all debts and charges addressed to them. Read that as unlimited, but fraudulent, access to American assets and for government purposes, American credit. So we have had American babies serving as vessels, and their estates serving as cargoes, and it's the Bottomry Bonds scandal all over again. The unlawfully converted Americans misidentified as British territorial U.S. citizens and then redefined as municipal corporation franchises, have been forced to issue public bonds to pay the insurance owed the public interest related to the lost vessels, and their cargoes, as well as paying the municipal and British Crown subcontractors for all this duplicitous disservice. This could never be done in America, as our government presumes no ownership interest in living people, which is why the American babies had to first be unlawfully converted into British territorial U.S. citizens. Instead, the perpetrators couldn't do it to us. They had to pretend that we were someone else, subject to other laws and legal presumptions. The Dutch East India Company and its municipal corporation successors have all proven to be criminal entities, repetitiously repeating the same fraud schemes and promoting the same evils since the 1500s. The British Crown corporations have always aided and abetted the municipal corporations, for the very good reason that they belong to the same people and ultimately serve the same interests, are equally long-term offenders. These legal fictions have no natural right to exist and no right to cause problems for living people or for life on this planet. They are specifically required to function, lawfully, and not merely legally, as a condition for their existence. They have self-evidently failed this condition. Just as self-evidently, their parent corporations have also failed to properly organize and direct their operations. The Treaty of Union and Acts of Union giving rise to the United Kingdom as a new political moiety called Great Britain, and incorporating this as a British Crown corporation and later, the creation of UK, Inc. as a municipal corporation, has caused nothing but continual war, crime of all kinds, and confusion which has often been used to promote fraud and illegal confiscation of rights and assets, right up to and including the current genocide for profit. These and other so-called national corporations have not overall served the interests of the nations and people that they were created to serve. They have instead operated as crime syndicates and have used their set-aside enclaves, like the District of Columbia, and so-called independent, international city-states, akin to Vatican City, as pirate bases. The employees of these corporations have acted as predators and parasites upon the people they are supposed to serve. They have embezzled, stolen, commandeered, and purloined assets belonging to their employers, undermined the national governments, and engaged in endless war profiteering at the expense of the living. We wish for all of these criminal corporations to be liquidated or forfeited directly to us, their preferential priority creditors, with their assets to be collected in our favor and administered by us, to rebuild the world, restore the planet's biosphere, and issue prepaid credit back to the victims in this country and throughout the world. We wish for an end to the warmongering and war profiteering and rampant criminality that has been foisted off on the world by these same corporations over and over again for the better part of 5 centuries. We should not have to deal with reiterations and variations of complex multi-generational public-private fraud schemes like the Bottomry Bonds scandal or object, again, to the Justinian deception, which uses corruption of language as a means to defraud and obtain coercive power. A 1500-year-old fraud scheme that is currently being reprised as par syntax and which is being supported by contracts with the Holy See. If it was unlawful 1500 years ago, it's still unlawful now. We should not have to come forward and remind the Vatican Chancery Court of this, nor should we have to prove at every turn our ability to discern and apply our discernment. We know full well and in detail how the rulership of the world was overturned and given to powers of darkness, how this necromancer's trick was used to promote the interests of the dead over the interests of the living, so as to impersonate and defraud the living, and how all this fraud has been administered under conditions of fraud and deceit, and enforced under color of law. We have seen the determination of the High Courts in the case of Yah versus Regina, observed the proof that Elizabeth II never actually acted as any form of Christian monarch, never sat on the throne of England, but sat upon the chair of the Estates instead. We also know how a president of a British Crown corporation operated out of Puerto Rico was substituted as the president of our United States, and all the fraud and theft and misrepresentation that allowed down to the current day, when modern-day counterparts propose to occupy our American Federal Republic and have British Crown officers operating our Federal Republic for us and pretending to represent us, when they do not, and when they have no authority whatsoever to operate in any such capacity. As our claim should prove, our Federal Republic is not vacated and never was and never will be. We wish for all these offenders to be recognized for what they are and what they have done. We wish for the Holy See to fully disclose its business relationship with King John beginning in 1215, so that everyone on earth has a good view of exactly how this whole scheme was set up, how the Pope's overseer of the Commonwealth lands was foisted off as the King of England, while operating as a municipal government, Holy Roman Empire employee instead. We wish for all this dirt, deceit, and criminality to be dug out root, stem, and leaf, renounced and turned away from forevermore. We wish for all these ancient fraud schemes designed to seize upon the assets and the given names of innocent people, and now, even attempting to seize upon and change their God-given DNA into a commercial product owned by patent holders, all of it. We wish for these crimes and misrepresentations to be renounced and abandoned, the perpetrators punished, and the corporations responsible dissolved, forfeited in all forms and jurisdictions, forever. We wish for Satan's kingdom of lies to be desolated, and left behind, a sad artifact in old books, fully exposed for what it is. We wish for the Holy See to be released from its pandering to the dead. We wish to live at peace, free of all and any obligation, public or private, to pay for the sins of corporations or to otherwise answer for them. We wish for everyone on earth to notice the divine order, and the mandate of heaven, that the living cannot be subjected to the dead. So we wish for these offending corporations to pass away and for them and all corporations like them to remain in the past, together with all their schemes and tricks and fraudulent enterprises. Issued by Anna Maria Riesinger, Fiduciary. The United States of America in care of Box 520994 Big Lake, Alaska 99652. April 9, 2023. Thank you for liking and subscribing. If you feel this is valuable information, please share with family and friends. Thank you.